People today often say that if we just went back to the gold standard, money would finally be honest again. No more money printing, no more funny money. Every dollar supposedly backed by real gold again. A lot of people, from gold fans on social media to some politicians, say that would finally make our money honest. No more inflation eating your paycheck. No more wild Federal Reserve experiments. It sounds safe. But here's the catch. The United States has already tried that experiment. For almost a century, we lived under different versions of the gold standard, and along with big gains in trade and growth, we also got bank runs, farmer revolts, and the Great Depression. So in this video, I want to show you what the gold standard actually did in practice, why America and the rest of the world eventually killed it, and what that history really means for your job, your savings, and your future. Back in the late 1800s, money across the world was chaotic. Every country had its own coins, its own paper, its own promises. If you were an American business getting paid in British pounds or French francs, crossing a border meant asking, "What will this money be worth when it finally gets home?" At the same time, steamships, railroads, and telegraphs were shrinking the planet. Trade was exploding, and merchants and bankers wanted something simple and predictable. The solution that elites settled on was brutal in its simplicity. Tie your currency to gold at a fixed rate, and promise that anyone can swap paper money for a specific amount of metal. If one US dollar and one British pound are just different weights of gold, then the exchange rate is simple math. This system is what we call the gold standard. Your money is just a claim on a fixed amount of gold sitting in a vault. Gold became the universal measuring stick. For investors, that was comforting. It felt like the government's hands were tied. Politicians couldn't quietly destroy the value of money, at least in theory, because gold was a hard limit. But that hard limit came with a hidden cost. Under a gold standard, the amount of money in your economy is tied to how much gold you can dig out of the ground or pull in through trade surpluses with other countries. The government can't freely create dollars without risking a run on its gold reserves, people showing up and demanding metal instead of paper. In good times, that discipline looks responsible. In bad times, it turns cruel. When a recession hits, people spend less, businesses earn less, and governments naturally want to spend more to stabilize things, build projects, support banks, send relief checks. Under gold, doing that aggressively risks losing your gold to other countries and collapsing confidence in your money. So instead of printing money or cutting interest rates hard, the system forces adjustment another way, through falling wages and falling prices. Prices and paychecks go down, but the number on your debt stays the same. It sounds nice at first. Stuff gets cheaper, until you remember that your mortgage, your student loans, and your credit card bill don't shrink. In the late 19th century United States, farmers and workers watched crop prices fall year after year, while the dollar value of their mortgages and loans stayed exactly the same. Every dollar they owed got heavier in real terms. That's why, in 1896, American politician William Jennings Bryan stood up and warned that ordinary people were being crucified upon a cross of gold. To him, the gold standard wasn't sound money. It was a metal cage that protected creditors and bondholders and squeezed everyone who owed money, people like small farmers and workers. And that was just in peacetime. Total war blew up the logic of gold completely. When World War I broke out in 1914, European governments suddenly faced bills on a scale taxpayers would never accept in the short term. On paper, the gold standard said, keep your currency fully convertible into gold, no cheating. In reality, those governments needed to borrow and print money on a massive scale just to survive. So they quietly suspended convertibility. They stopped letting people trade paper money for gold at the old fixed rate. Without saying it out loud, they admitted that survival mattered more than metallic purity. After the war, everyone wanted to get back to normal. In the 1920s, countries tried to go back onto gold, often at unrealistic pre-war exchange rates that no longer fit their economies. Britain is the classic example. In 1925, it went back to gold at the old, strong pound value, even though the British economy wasn't nearly as strong as before the war. That made British exports expensive and uncompetitive, and it worsened unemployment at home, because defending that gold peg meant crushing wages and prices instead of letting the currency fall. Then came the Great Depression. When banks began to fail and economies shrank in the early 1930s, the gold standard turned a brutal downturn into a full-scale catastrophe. Central banks were afraid to slash interest rates or flood the system with money to save banks, because doing that could trigger panic and a run on their gold reserves. The pattern is striking. Countries that gave up on gold early, like Britain in 1931, started to recover sooner. Countries that clung to gold longer, like France, and at first the United States, suffered deeper, more prolonged collapses. By the end of World War II, policymakers knew the old, strict gold standard was dead. But they were also terrified of a world with nothing but free-floating paper currencies, competitive devaluations, and trade chaos like the 1930s. So in 1944, at a place called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, they built a hybrid system. Only the US dollar would be tied directly to gold, at $35 an ounce. Other countries would peg their currencies to the dollar, not to gold itself, but they'd keep some capital controls and policy tools to manage their own economies. Gold moved into the background as an anchor, and the dollar became the central star of the new monetary universe. For a couple of decades, it worked surprisingly well. Europe and Japan rebuilt, world trade exploded, and the United States, holding most of the world's gold, became banker to the planet. But there was a built-in contradiction, later called the Triffin dilemma. What that means is, for the rest of the world to have enough dollars to trade, save, and build up foreign exchange reserves, America had to keep sending more dollars out than it took in, running trade and budget deficits. But the more dollars Washington sent overseas, the more foreign governments and central banks started quietly asking, are all of these dollars really backed by gold at $35 an ounce? By the 1960s, the math no longer worked. There were far more dollars sitting in foreign central banks than there was gold in U.S. vaults to redeem them at the official price. Some countries, especially France under President de Gaulle, began calling America's bluff. They literally sent ships to New York and demanded physical gold in exchange for their dollars. U.S. gold stocks fell, confidence wobbled, and everyone could see the system was cracking. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and made a dramatic announcement. The United States would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold for foreign governments. That temporary move became permanent. The gold window was slammed shut. Overnight, the last formal link between major world currencies and gold disappeared. The dollar, and by extension almost every other currency, became fiat money. Money that's valuable not because you can swap it for a fixed weight of metal, but because the government declares it legal tender, and because everyone else still accepts it in trade. Nixon's motives were practical and political. Stop the bleeding of U.S. gold, regain room to fight unemployment and pay for Vietnam-era spending, and avoid an open devaluation that would have looked like a national humiliation. But at a deeper level, this was always where the gold experiment was heading. Whenever governments were forced to choose between strict gold discipline and the ability to respond to social and political pressure at home, they chose survival and flexibility over metal purity. That's the real lesson of the rise and fall of the gold standard. Gold did solve real problems. It gave the world a common yardstick for trade. It anchored exchange rates. It gave people who lent money confidence that their savings wouldn't be wiped out overnight by surprise inflation. But it also hardwired pain into the system. Deflation that crushed people in debt, rigid constraints during crises, and political backlash whenever voters got tired of endless austerity just to defend a fixed gold peg. We didn't abandon gold because it stopped glittering, or because it failed as a physical commodity. We abandoned it because the human and political cost of forcing entire societies to obey that metal became too high. Today we live in a fiat world, with central banks, floating exchange rates, asset bubbles, and quiet inflation. And with financial crises often managed by unelected experts, the technocrats at central banks, instead of by a simple metallic rule. But under all the nostalgia, the basic trade-off hasn't changed. Do we want money that is perfectly hard and mechanically disciplined, or a system that can bend under pressure without breaking society? Gold offered discipline. Fiat offers flexibility. Neither is free. So the next time someone says, "We just need to go back to gold," remember what the history actually shows. Gold gave us discipline, but it also gave us depressions. Fiat gives us flexibility, but it also tempts abuse. There is no magical, risk-free money, only trade-offs most people would rather not think about. Now I want to hear from you. If you had to choose today, would you pick a hard gold standard or our current flexible fiat system, and why? Comment gold if you'd go back, fiat if you'd stay where we are, and tell me your reason. If this helped you see money a little differently, hit like so more people find it. Subscribe for more deep dives into money and power.